Hello, and a very warm welcome to wherever you are in the world studying flower essence therapy. This is a subject that I am personally very passionate about. It is a subject that may challenge your ideas about naturopathic practice, particularly in relation to evidence-based practice. And we're going to talk a little bit about the current evidence that is available for flowers later on. So I just want to get that out on the table to begin with. This is a subject which is also an incredibly practical subject. So whilst you can sit here and learn rote-learnt style this subject, you may find that you get more out of it. You may find that you've grasped what on earth flower essences is by actually taking them yourself. And, you know, if you have willing guinea pigs at home, prescribing them to others and seeing what happens. So I really strongly encourage you to look at making this as practical as possible. I'm going to, as we go through the flowers, tell you a little bit about my clinical experience, but that's just my personal experience. And so it may not mean all that much to you as a soon-to-be naturopathic practitioner. So a little bit about myself before we dive in, just short so you know who on earth is speaking to you about flower essences. My name is Tanya Morris. I've been a lecturer here at college for coming up 10 years, and I teach mostly within the naturopathic department, so herbal medicine, philosophy, and flower essence therapy. And I also look after some clinics towards the end, predominantly on the Brisbane campus, but I have taught on the Gold Coast campus as well. My interest in flower essence therapy really came from my fascination with how the mind affects the body. I've always had a large attraction to that area and that concept. And it's kind of always been with me ever since I was little. So I went into naturopathy because of the idea of holism. That idea resonated so strongly with everything that I kind of felt the world was. And when I learnt about flower essences, it was a bit overwhelming initially. I didn't quite know what to make of it. I didn't take any of the flower essences myself. It was all a theory, and I really didn't understand what they were and how they related to naturopathic practice, so I didn't use them initially. And it wasn't until much later, and I got a wonderful practitioner as a supervisor who encouraged me to try flower essences, and it wasn't until then that I really started to understand how on earth they related to healing in general, and how they actually strongly correlated to my ideas about healing, which is, and as we move through, it certainly isn't my own idea, that our connection with emotions and our connection with an idea of something bigger than ourselves, like a spiritual kind of idea, is integral to balance within the human system and the human body. And it's also, I think, key to happiness, which helps to bring about that balance. So I spent a lot of years doing yoga and teaching yoga and playing with flower essences and playing with this idea, and I'm still playing with it, but it really is a useful tool within my clinical practice. I find it invaluable. as a clinician. So just a little bit of an overview about flower essences. Where on earth did they come from? Are they relatively new? People have ideas that, oh, there was some guy, English guy, Bach, Batch, however you pronounce it, that bought flower essences in about the 30s, and so they've been around only a short period of time, and they're sort of new agey, and they're made up probably, and you know, these are things that you hear. I certainly hear over the 10 or so years that I've been playing with them. But realistically, they've actually been a part of quite a few different healing traditions over the centuries. So that's important to know from a traditional point of view. They fit in within different traditions depending on different ideas that underpin them. They fit into the emotional connections with disease, and even times the spirit aspect of an individual. Spirituality, the concept of the soul. It depends on the tradition as to what it's being called, but there's this idea that disease doesn't just manifest in the physical. And you would have got this a lot through your studies already in naturopathic philosophy, that there's this concept of holism and also vitalism, and that in order to treat someone that's presenting to you, oftentimes, particularly in Australian practice with a physical manifestation of a disease, sometimes when you're talking to them in clinic, you can kind of clearly see a correlation between a strong emotional attachment, like a story that people have with an emotion that's really causing them a great deal of stress. And this isn't new. This is something that has been picked up, and consequently people have tried to find out ways of dealing with it in a kind of a practical sense, being the treating physician. And so flower essences were one way that lots of various traditions around the world chose to address this, the emotional and also the spiritual and mental aspects of disease. So flower essences have been known to work on the physical level and filter through to the mind, the emotions, and the spirit, and also back the other way. So you can kind of use flower essences either way in treatment, because what you're ultimately looking at is that person in front of you and the story that they have about life and where that's causing them imbalance and dis-ease, and how that's relating to how they're presenting to your clinic in that particular moment. So an example of flower essences being used on a physical level is actually in Australia, in Western Australia. There's some research from hospitals over there that are using flower essence therapy in cream form for pain, and they're prescribed as such. So that's one example of the physical, and there's loads of examples of treating the emotions and even the spirit with flower essence therapy, and we're going to talk a lot about that as we go through. So flower essences, what on earth are they? And you'll get this question a lot potentially in clinical practice. And even if you don't get the question, you might like to kind of preempt the question if you're wanting to prescribe flower essences, because they're not as widely known as something like herbal medicine or nutritional medicine. So this is one definition. Flower essences are produced by imprinting a flower's unique vibrational healing signature onto a carrier solution. And there's a picture here of a flower essence being made. And what you'll notice is that there's flower petals on the top of that bowl. Underneath those flower petals is water, and water is often used as the carrier solution. and oftentimes it's spring water, and it's quite specified as spring water. There's lots of information about different types of waters and how they're used, particularly in a healing sense, and that's a whole other field, and we won't go into that now, but it's certainly interesting. Dr. Emoto, for example, was one more modern day researcher that tried in some ways to quantify this, and it's a place to start. So what on earth do they mean by the unique vibrational healing signature? For those of you who have read a little bit about homeopathy, this may make a bit more sense, but it's the idea of the flower leaving no physical trace of its substance behind. So we're not talking about the essential oils here, the volatile oils. We're not talking about the flower in a physical sense like we would in versions of herbal medicine. We're talking about the vital force of the flower, and that each flower has a unique vibration. So in the same ways that our vital force is moving throughout, in the same way a plant has a vital force moving through it, and the flower is said to be the manifestation of that vital force. It carries the signature of the plant, it carries the lesson of the plant, and the healing potential of the plant for us. So there's lots of ways that flower essences were used to get that essence, and we're going to go through them when we move through the history of flower essences, how people throughout history have done that. But this next slide delves a little bit more into other ways that you can explain what flower essences are and how they work, which is a question we get a lot, and without kind of biological plausibility to how these things physically work in the body, it can be really difficult to explain. So this is from the people who created that pain cream that I was talking about in Western Australia, the living essences, and we'll be touching on some of those essences as we go through the course. So they see flower essences as having three aspects to their healing potential, how they work. The first is understanding. So a flower brings about an understanding to overcome a problematic state of mind. And the way that I see this, because I'm a very visual person, is I imagine somebody who's in, I call it the story around the emotion. And it's like, that's all they see. They're in a whirlpool and everything's murky. The water's all murky around them. And they can't see anything but the murkiness of that constantly spinning problem, that constant whirlpool. Flower essences, I see it almost like a helicopter that comes along and picks that person up out of the whirlpool so that they can look down on top of that whirlpool and go, the rest of this river is clear, the rest of this river is flowing. It was just that little whirlpool that I was stuck in that was the problem. And so you can create this kind of almost like an observation of the emotional difficulty of the story, the spiritual distress, whatever it is that they're presenting with. You get this ability to observe it for what it really is. And with that observation comes a wisdom, comes the awareness that I'm not this whirlpool. I'm actually something much bigger. I'm part of that flowing river. And it was just that temporary stuckness in the whirlpool that was the problem. And I can move out of it, and I can move into a different way of being, a different way of seeing the world. So creating a new relationship with the emotional state, new relationship with who you feel that you are as an individual, whatever you're presenting with. So inspiration, flower essence gives inspiration by revealing what is achievable. So this is like, if you've decided that you're an angry person and that anger is bad, and that in order to be a nice person, in order to be loved by those around you, you need to suppress that anger. And so it may come up as sadness or frustration or some other expression, rather than just pure anger that doesn't have to affect anybody else. So it may come up as aggression or passive aggressiveness. Whatever it is, it's a distortion of that emotion. And flower essences kind of takes you back and says, an emotion is just energy in motion. It is what it is. And if you can stay clear and awake in that emotional state, then you don't have to have a distorted relationship with it. And you can stay balanced and you can stay at peace despite the emotion. And flower essences give you that sense of relief for the mind and shows you this is how you can be with this emotion. And finally, vital force. As I said, the flower essence has its own vital force. And when we take that essence, it's almost like if we are usually vibrating at a particular frequency, and we've had a couple of knocks, and we're vibrating down a little bit further, and we're starting to feel that imbalance, we're starting to feel unwell, we're starting to maybe physically manifest in disease state. It's almost like you're kind of constantly putting a unique vibration back into your vibrational vital force to bring it back up to the level that you're used to vibrating at. As you can tell, I'm very visual. So yeah, I hope that that works for you. I hope that makes sense. All right, so just a little bit about the history, because it's so vast. I just wanted to touch on a few things. So first of all, in Australia, we have our own history with flower essence therapy. And I've given you a link to a YouTube clip about a pit healing ceremony, which was one particular tribe in Western Australia. This is the way that they used flower essences. And it had nothing to do with the physical aspects of the flower or the aromatic aspects of the flower. They had the same idea that the flower holds its own unique healing potential. And the way that they used that in healing was an Aboriginal pit healing ceremony. And I'll just kind of briefly go over what that was, just in case the YouTube clip, you can't hear it very well. So basically, there's some great pictures on this slide. They were given to me by a woman who has been through this Aboriginal pit healing. And what happened is they originally started by digging a shallow grave in the earth. They filled that shallow grave up a little bit with hot coals or hot stones. Then earth was placed over the top of those hot stones so that people could actually physically lay on them without overheating or burning themselves. And then specially chosen flowers were laid on top of that. Now these specially chosen flowers were chosen for the emotional states that they could affect, or the physical states that they could affect. The example, the YouTube clip, is of polio that was treated in this way. It's a very physical disease. Then water was sprinkled on top, and that started almost like a sauna happening. Then the individual was laid over the top of that. They were covered with something like kangaroo skin or tree bark. And then the essence, the vibrational force of that flower, or those flowers, there's often a few, would permeate through their whole being, permeate through their vital force. And the individual would be cared for by the tribe, so those that were circling the individual, and they would make sure that they had plenty of water to drink and that they were comfortable. And they would also use sound therapy, so things like didgeridoo and clapping sticks, chanting. What also tended to happen in the traditional sense, in the traditional Aboriginal elders' story of this pit healing ceremony, was that they initially came through with like a death ceremony. And what they believed was that it was the spirit of the individual, that part of the spirit that was unwell, that was diseased, that was kind of out of balance, was dying. And then once this ceremony was completed, once the person was healed, felt healed, had an emotional shift, whatever needed to happen, they would come out into a welcoming ceremony, in almost like a birthing ceremony, because they had a new spirit. So that's quite a profound healing ceremony. Flower essences were used throughout ancient Egypt, India, Asia, Europe, South America. They're not restricted to any one place in the world. They had a vast history and lots of different ways of using them. So then the next one, you may have heard of Hildegard by now. She was an abbess and is quite renowned for being a healer. She's quite prophetic, and she used a lot of flower essence therapy in treating emotional aspects to disease. And the way that she used to treat, and she would teach the other nuns to treat, was to place muslin cloth over the top of the flowers, and that would catch the morning dew from the flowers. That muslin cloth was taken off and wrung out, and that water was given as a drink to the patients. And when we move through how to make up a mother tincture, it's essentially what's being done there. The earliest written recordings of flower essence therapy was more than likely Paracelsus. It's certainly what we know of. Paracelsus, for those of you who don't remember, he was in the 16th century. Actually, there's a bit of debate as to whether it was a he or a she. I'll leave that debate out, but I will say Paracelsus instead of he or she. And Paracelsus also collected the dew to correct emotional disharmony in individuals, which is quite unique. So that is the first section of flower essences. Next, we're going to move into the different varieties that we're going to be studying, different flower essences. Also, we're going to move into the doctrine of signatures, which is exciting, and then how that doctrine of signatures applies to flower essence therapy. So have a break, have a think, and I'll see you in a moment.